Welcome everyone to this new episode of Tea and Chi with my brother Kevin Orosz, KO. So for anyone who doesn't know you already, Kevin, we'd like to know a little bit about who you are, what you're about, and what you do as your profession.
Yeah, awesome. Great to be here, Owen. Appreciate the invite. And yeah, profession, I mainly am working inside of coaching and consulting. I also, facilitate events and do public speaking. The past several years has been really deep in an inquiry around men's work, masculinity, tantra, relating, communication, and also business development as well. These are kind of the main areas I've worked within, supporting entrepreneurs to, grow and scale their business in a sustainable way, and also helping, creatives, artistic people, folks who are interested in like the deeper layers of emotionality and masculine feminine dynamics of polarity and sexual tension and mastery and intimacy to really nail that. And that's what I do in my book, Sex, Masculinity, God, is really go into these topics with my two co-authors. And yeah, just been living really blessed on a trust fall as a digital nomad and entrepreneur now for about, I guess it's been 7, 8, 9 years, depending on where you start the needle.
So what would you say is an important aspect of embodying all that what you're coaching about? Because a lot of people teach and preach what you're doing, but when I met you, you really embody all that you're teaching, and you're a powerful dude physically, mentally, emotionally. So for somebody who's on the path of wanting to empower themselves, how can they do that in a way that's embodied both emotionally, energetically, and physically?
Mm-hmm. What started my journey is I wasn't embodied. So it's not like, I was always just embodied. And then I still have work to do, obviously. Like I've not completed anything. But, it really starts with practices. It starts with having principles or values, or call it your own philosophy, whatever you want to call it, and then moving in that direction. And then that's going to involve physicality, right? So what are the main physical things we do? Well, we move. So it's going to involve movement, which becomes everything from, hiking or being in nature, walking to, whatever kind of training you're doing, weightlifting, martial arts, yoga, capoeira, dance, whatever. You got to have some kind of movement. That's going to be a huge part of it. Sexuality. So one of the most amazing ways we can use our body is sexuality. So are you embodied in your sexuality, right? On your own and with the partner. And it's going to involve your voice, right? So how you speak and how you enunciate and articulate is important. And that is going to come more powerfully when you're speaking from experience in the body. So, think about everything you use your body for. Food comes in here, sleep, hydration, all the basic stuff, but it becomes very important when we flip the script on, the way we're taught and conditioned in school and by society, which is that you're just a brain, right? You're just an ego, you're a brain, and this is how things work. Everything is a mental construct. It can be understood intellectually, it can be understood through materialism, which, when you go deep into that, it becomes pretty clear that that's a bunch of bullshit and it's not true at all, because there's many, many other dimensions. And denying the body, denying the physicality, the emotions, the sensations, the intuition, it's not going to serve you really well. And this ends up who I support a lot of time in coaching is folks who, have become very disembodied because of their career, because of their trauma, or their belief systems.
I love that you started with the foundation of, I believe you said, philosophy and principles, because that's the most sturdy foundation that I found in the process of embodiment and empowerment. Is if you don't have something to stand for, then you don't have a foundation, you don't have something to stand on. And like you said, we're taught so much about materialism that that should be your foundation, that your foundation should be your career or your finances or your even your relationships, which are always fluctuating and changing. But when you have that foundation, that solid foundation of your principles and your philosophies, that's where your rock bottom should be if you want to be really. And I'm not trying to use the word like unfazed, but stoic, being stoic and strong enough to continue on through all the suffering in life and all the joys in life is having that foundation, having that foundational value of love or compassion or uh, healing, something that can hold you when there's nothing else. Because we all go through these transformations where there's something gets pulled out from under us, and what's under that superficial kind of material rug that gets pulled under us is what catches us. So it's interesting that you told me that you weren't always so embodied, because when I met you, you're kind of not at your prime. We're still both heading towards our prime, but pretty prime time KO, like in a good amount of power. So what was a bit of your process in finding that embodiment or finding that authenticity in your empowerment?
Mm-hmm. I mean, it goes to my kind of core principles or core philosophy, right? Which is evolving and has changed a lot over the years, probably even since we met originally. But, you know, for me, growing up, you know, I was totally in my head. I was obsessed with literature. I was obsessed with film, with gaming, with fantasy and imagination. And that was what fed me, because I was very much a loner, very introverted, and didn't feel safe around, you know, a lot of other people, because I was very like inward. And therefore my mind developed a shitload, and I was obsessed with stories and like, you know, reading Lord of the Rings as a kid and watching Star Wars and playing games and, you know, getting into poker and playing sports and like just that whole like the masculine striving competition, the hero's journey, the quest, the adventure, all these kind of archetypes really became very important to me. Now, what changed was at some point I got fed up with, you know, I thought I was going to go to grad school. I was on the academic path in psychology. I was also studying philosophy, and I was like, okay, I'll be an academic. This is what I'm good at. But what I realized is that, you know, I wasn't living in my body. And I looked around at all the people, the professors, the grad students, they weren't living in their body. They were miserable. They're unhealthy. And they were talking about health and wellness intellectually. And physically, they weren't there. So it's just like, how do I reconcile this? You know, and then I found psychedelics. Then I found yoga. Then I found martial arts. And I was like, oh shit, you know, I was completely wrong here. Then I later found qigong and tantra and tai chi and like what the Taoist and the Hindu, like, you know, strains of tantra, and just realized, you know, wow, I need to inhabit my body. And, you know, yoga helped a lot with that. Qigong, tai chi helped a lot with that initially. But then at some point, like you can be super fit, right? You can see these guys that are physically at their pinnacle, right? Like athletes or folks that are like very, very trained physically, and like they're ripped, you know, or, you know, women can do this too. They can just get extremely physically strong, but that doesn't make you integrated as a human being, because there's a special something, and you can call it charisma, you can call it magnetism, confidence, you know, whatever, joie de vivre, you know, there's a lot of different words for it. Elan vital, there's all these words that Freud and Jung and these guys used to describe it. But it's just basically you're integrated. So your emotions and your thoughts and your physicality are all pointed in the same direction. And it gives you this unshakable confidence that we call embodiment. Like, what even is embodiment, right? This was a big debate at one of these men's events I was doing here in Europe, is like, what is embodiment? You know, like what the fuck does that even mean? And that's a good question. What does it mean? Maybe we can define it for ourselves, but for me, it's having that it's basically meaning. You're enacting meaning or performing meaning is how I think about it at this point. So if you have a strong purpose or meaning, or you have a very strong sense of yourself, which means you love yourself and you also know what your skills and weaknesses are. And you can move that physically with your voice, with your physicality. You are a force to be reckoned with. And that makes you successful in dating. It makes you successful in business, makes you a powerful leader, makes you a powerful protector, provider for your family, etc. And so for me, it was like, it's almost like by studying these things in of themselves, I've kind of been forced to become them because I'm so interested in them and also curious. And I've also been called to share and teach these things.
That's going to resonate with so many people, your journey. I mean, I see it in so many of my close friends of this dynamic of you're only allowed so much freedom when you're in your youth, right? There's a lot of restriction. There's a lot of ageism in the world still. And a lot of that forces us inwards if we're wise enough to go inwards or brave enough to go inwards. And the process for myself as well has totally been so similar to that in diving into philosophy, but also diving into the power of stories and the power of archetypes, in that a lot of the master level qigong practitioners that I've met in my life, a lot of them were inspired by stories like Star Wars. A lot of them were inspired by these philosophies like the universal force, that is a genderless, religionless, kind of agnostic Taoist way of looking at how we all connect to energy. And that for me as well was looking at myself, having been a very athletic martial arts kind of guy, but then it was never in my body. It was never in my body until about 2017 when I met my qigong teacher and I started massage school, was really healing the physical body and getting those philosophies to become a part of your physical experience. People call it grounding. I like to call it embodiment or empowerment, because you're welcoming in that cosmic, limitless, philosophical, spiritual aspect of who you are at a deep level into this very tiny body, which physically expands and empowers you. It's unbelievable. I've had a hard time putting on muscle throughout my youth, but coming into qigong and coming into these spiritual practices without even as much exercise as I used to do, the physical empowerment comes. So I would love to ask you a Jedi question. So I see a lot of people, it actually triggered me a little bit, that like do cosplay and maybe they're like into the Jedi way of life. But from your perspective, what was it like for you to actually embody those principles in a grounded and realistic way, where you're actually embodying the universal force and connection and utilizing that to heal and empower yourself and your community?
Yeah, you mean like specifically Jedi principles?
Yeah, specifically regarding the qi, the universal force,
Right.
The qi and the qigong, which is so aligned with the universal force. So yeah,
Totally. I mean, basically, the way I heard it is George Lucas was inspired by basically like qigong kung fu masters and the samurai, and that's like how he developed Jedi. They're almost like, it's like Bushido meets Taoism meets Zen. That's kind of how he developed them in that mythos. I actually read the books too. I was like obsessed. But I mean, for me, it's like, what is a Jedi, right? Like, what is like Obi-Wan Kenobi? It's like he's a spiritual master. So he's a master of the spirit world, which is unseen, whatever you want to call it, the Tao, universal energy, the force. But he's also just like very savvy. So he knows how to navigate situations in the human world. So he's not just like some monk. He's extremely savvy in the physical world too, and wise, knows what should be done when and timing, and you know, very charismatic, knows how to talk, and is diplomatic, knows how to be respectful but also not take bullshit. So for me, all this stuff, it was embodied in language. So yes, like doing, you know, qigong under a waterfall, like you feel like a badass because when you start to really get into the energy, you know, you're just full of energy and full of, you know, that empowering feeling in your body of health and vitality and chi, the universal force. But also, like, you know, that's an experience you can have alone. You can share it with others, but it's very, very personal experience. So for me, it's all about language. So it's like when you're practicing this stuff, what do you do when you have a conflict at work, or when you're going on a date, or when you're meeting new people, or you're in a social situation, or you're having a discourse or a dialogue? That's where this stuff comes into practice. And someone who knows themselves deeply and is embodied will just be more at ease. They're not going to be trying to prove something. They're not going to be threatened by someone else's power because they have their own power. And this is where friendly strength can meet friendly strength, right? I forget the psychologist who created this kind of like dichotomy, but it was basically like friendly strength and there's unfriendly strength. And then there's like friendly weakness and unfriendly weakness. And like people usually fall into one of these categories and they relate to each other in certain ways. So becoming a Jedi is like cultivating friendly strength and then treating others with friendly strength, because you can become strong and then still look down on people or like, you know, treat them differently. But a Jedi has respect and honor, and that's what separates, you know, becoming empowered, strong, you know, vital, confident, whatever, healthy, between someone who's just fit or skilled but doesn't have the inner work.
I love what you said about if you have your own strength, you're not so much fazed or afraid of external strength. And I feel like that's so much of what people get triggered by. People get triggered by, they see a force that's stronger than themselves or perceivably stronger than themselves outside of themselves. And immediately they're shaken inside because they don't have that strength. I have a really funny story about when I was working at a bar back in New York as a server. And there's this huge, massive bouncer, dude. And this is a very Jedi-like story as well. And he's massive. Like he probably bench presses whatever the F and works out all the time. And I kept getting the feeling like this guy is afraid of me. And then I went into meditation that night and I meditated. I'm like, is this guy afraid of me? Why is this guy afraid of me? And the message I got really clearly is he's definitely afraid of you because you have something that he doesn't have. You have spiritual strength, you have emotional strength, and all he has is physical strength. And part of that is he's cultivated because he's afraid. And so the next day, we're sitting at the bar. It's very, very slow day, nobody coming in. And he looks at me and he's like shaking. This huge 6 foot something dude. He's shaking and he's like, he points to me, he's like, this guy, I'm afraid of this guy. He's got like a killer instinct or something. And I'm like, there it is. And it was so revealing to not just that particular dynamic, but the dynamic of a lot of weak men in general. You see it in the military where they have all these guns and all these battleships and all these stealth bombers and political systems and governments because they're afraid. Because really inside they have this little boy who's shaking because they're weak. And they need all of these guns and all these weapons because they're afraid of life, because they've been shaken and have taken maybe a more dark or violent path because they don't have that inner strength. And that's part of the great honor of what you share with the world, because when you personally, through your words, through your energy, through your actions in these men's groups and these talks empower somebody who feels weak inside to become strong. Now they can not only improve their life emotionally going forward, not being so phased or shaken by all of these external forces, but also being able to help ripple effect all of these people who are so afraid of so many different things to be like, there's something bigger. There's something bigger inside you, all around you that is holding you. like we are these tiny bodies, but we're held in this infinite space, in this infinite life, like effortlessly. The planet, this tiny little planet, beautiful planet called Earth. I like to call her Gaia, the living Earth. She's being held effortlessly in space, flying through space, orbiting around the sun, which is orbiting around other suns. And it's effortless. There's nothing stronger than that effortless space, literal space that's holding entire galaxies effortlessly. And that's a part of empowerment that I love to embody, is that space. Like people say holding space a lot is a great term, and it's overused in the in the new age community, but it's like when you're holding space, it's like you're effortlessly caressing and magnetizing and holding the nature, like the Taoists say, wu wei, effortless living. That's what I feel, even beyond going with the flow with the water elements. It's that akash, that space element that's just holding everything without having to use muscle, without having to use physical exertion. I have a great Jedi Master friend, Sean Simmons, who I got to get on this show, who's an Aikido black belt. And he was training with me one time. And Aikido, for anyone who doesn't know, is all about effortless self-defense. It's not aggressive. It's not certain aspects of like Kung Fu or karate or MMA, where it's like aggressive. It's all very inward, using energy, ki, in Japanese, to defend yourself and others. And we would be practicing the movements, and I would be exerting physical strength, trying to overpower him. And he's a big dude, 6'4", Australian and Aboriginal dude. And he's just like, he's joking. He's like, you're very strong. You're very strong. And it was like not moving him at all. And he's like, now try Wu Wei, now try effortless. And then this big dude, I go, completely effortless, throw him on his ass. And he was throwing me on my ass the whole training session. So that's another practical embodiment of empowerment. It's not this brute triple heater, I'm fighting, I'm Joe Rogan, or I'm this big masculine dude that goes and hunts and does all this stuff. It's like, no, it's much more powerful to be the Akash, be the space element. And in that regard, what would you say, and we got about 10 minutes left here, what would you say is something that you've learned about holding space for people through all of your experiences with men's work and group circles and healing circles and all of this type of work?
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely layers to it. I mean, as you're describing, like a lot of men have cultivated a ton of physical strength, which is amazing. And sometimes you need that to hold space because there's physical aspects. Like sometimes someone might actually need to be physically supported or feel, safe physically. And that's a real thing. That's where, massage and body work and these other things can come in. For me, it's like the mental plane, the mental energy or space, as you're saying, the Akash. It's the fourth dimension. It's like holding time and space at the same time. And you can do this with your attention. So a lot of space holding, or whatever you want to call it, is just being very attentive, hyper perceptive. And for me, it's all about asking questions. So I've become an expert at asking questions, especially when someone is trying to see their blind spot or arrive at a conclusion or solve a problem that they can't see or identify. And, a lot of it is just allowing. It's nudging, it's allowing, it's timing, and it's emergent. So if you are trusting your subconscious or your soul or being and their being to work together, there's almost like a third space created that you can access, and all the information is there. So then it's just about how do you skillfully translate it or time it correctly. And that's mostly what it is, because most people just want to be heard. They just need someone to listen to them so they can organize themselves in real time. They might also just need attention. They might need to be seen. And that will change them, because maybe some people have never seen these parts of them. They've never shown them, or they feel deprived or at a loss for some reason. And that's why they're asking for support. And, we all need this, and we all do this on some level. It's just when you do it professionally and you are able to mirror to someone, what they're looking for, what they're feeling at a very high level, it's like miracles can happen. Like they can understand something about themselves for the first time in their entire life, like in real time, or they can, remember something that they had forgotten, or they, there's many forms it takes, but ultimately as a human, and this is really well described in the Celestine Prophecy, James Redfield's book, which is like a classic for the spiritual community. It's like, 20, 30 years old now. It's written in the 90s. And it talks about, if you want to stimulate the flow of synchronicity, just like meaningful coincidences or whatever, omens, signs, you can call them whatever, sit with someone and give them your energy freely. Charge them up with your attention. You don't even need to do anything. If you just focus on someone, you'll give them energy. And when they have enough energy, they can then share themselves, and then they'll give you energy. And if you do this as much as possible every day, by opening people up in this way, they'll give you what you need. You'll hear something you needed to hear. Something will happen at the perfect moment. Talk about business. This is where you meet the business partner, the client, the colleague, the mentor. I've seen it happen a million different ways with a million different types of people, and it's real. And so if you're able to hold space, even for like 5 seconds at a bus stop, miracles start to happen, because you're stimulating this flow of energy that's unseen between all beings. And it can happen in nature. You can have to do this with a frog or a bird. With people, it's just amazing because we have language, so you can like really get good information from it.
That's such a perfect way of describing it. I mean, I spent a good amount of time in Hawaii learning from the Kumus and the Hawaiian elders, and then also spent a lot of time connecting with part of my ancestry with the Chinese and Mongolian philosophy and shamanism. And it's interesting, one little island chain in the middle of the Pacific Ocean has the same exact proverb as the ancient Chinese Taoist and shaman masters, which is exactly what you were talking about. Where your attention goes, energy flows. So if we could learn this and embody this, a lot of problems will cease to exist, because a lot of our problems here on the planet are the opposite of what you're describing. Like when you are connecting with your home or your friend or a frog or a tree, and you're giving your full attention, you're giving your full energy generously, that's when miracles happen. But then we have the opposite, where you have energy vampires, like big giant sports stadiums and giant media conglomerations and giant tech conglomerations, or like figures like Elon Musk is like, if we would just stop giving our energy to these organizations, political organizations as well, they would cease to have the power. So that's the opposite of that, which you're describing. What we give our attention to, we fuel and we invest our energy into. So if people are just giving their sacred energy to the Kardashians and the freaking reality TV shows, that's promulgating and reciprocating and reinforcing this sort of dynamic that's kind of destroying humanity in terms of our connection and our unity. That's the biggest thing so many different spiritualities and philosophies talk about, is that unity. Yoga means unity. Religare, religion, means to bind and unify, and also to control. And a lot of that's a bit more Latin medieval expression, but that's something that's so powerful about the work you do and Sacred Sons and men's work, is this dynamic of feeling this tribe around you, holding you. And it's not even effort required. This person has this wisdom you need. Just connecting with them, automatic, reciprocated. This person has this skill that will help you heal. This person has this energy that will help you expand and transform. It's all something we need to relearn. And I love the term decolonize, because a lot of the problems that we're going through are like colonist problems that were brought over to China and to America and to Africa. And before that, there was different problems in those places. But these colonial ideas and these colonial ways of life have divided and separated the indigenous people of all lands. And starting first with Europe, when it happened to the Europeans, the original Celtic tribes were indigenous mystics, wizards, witches, plant people, forest people. And then the Roman Empire comes in and divide and conquer, divide and conquer, divide and conquer. But if we could come back to that heart space, we could come back to that unifying space. We may not have utopia on a global scale, but we'll have little pockets of it, like Omega Convergence. That was like a little mini utopia. Oroville in India, definitely different places in Hawaii. It's like these little pockets, and Costa Rica, all these places are like popping up these little pockets of people who get it. Like if you just unify, put your ego down, and help each other to be energized and be full of love, miracles happen. Miracles happen. And we're running out of time, but do you have anything, finishing notes that you want to share with the community, with everyone watching?
Yeah, I mean, so many good topics there, but at the core of this whole idea of utopia and dystopia, both of these are fantasies. A pure utopia just won't happen. Even if we're all in like ascended master energy bodies, or some of these like mythologies you hear, even then it's like, okay, we got to reach some kind of consensus. Like, what are we going to do as a community? And that's actually okay that we can't all agree as humans. This is something I'm starting to realize more and more and more as I dive deep into blockchain and Web3 and that technology, which is like the decentralization of the web. The more you study indigenous people and actually look at like how do Aboriginal indigenous people actually live historically, not before they met, people with t-shirts, McDonald's, and, motorboats. It's all decentralized. It's small bands of people. And this is the idea of Dunbar's number, like 150 to 200, and push it